Thanks for having me along. I'm going to talk a little, then Renata's going to talk a little, and then I'm going to wrap up. I think I've been dubbed in today because I was involved in the Perth Biodiversity Project early on, and now I've been fortunate as a private individual to actually prepare some local biodiversity strategies. So I've got hopefully both perspectives, and I've also been involved in a few community groups as well. So please take what I say with a grain of salt, and I might be wearing 3 hats at different times, or one of 3 hats. And Renata prepared most of this presentation, so well done, Renata. And I thought it was important to put up the Perth Biodiversity Project's website, because you can find some fantastic tools on that website, and there's a lot of great stuff that's been written. There's a lot of important statistics, the sorts of things that you would expect a government of some sort to produce, and so it's fantastic that WALGA, with the support of government, has been producing that. Our talk is going to cover that, and we hopefully will talk a lot about outcomes and challenges. I won't dwell on the history, because I think a few of you were involved in it, and I don't mean that impolitely. Really, we're here to talk about the Perth Biodiversity Project. The Perth Biodiversity Project and local biodiversity strategies are the result, I suppose, of a long process of negotiation, and there was policy back, as is indicated there, back in 1995, talking about local bushland strategies, and then Bush Forever came out. The only other point I'd like to make is, and being involved in local government at that really sensitive time, I think back in the late 1990s, when there was a bit of biffo going on between local government and state government, because as local governments we knew that something was happening, that there was this regional bushland project going on by state government, and it would identify areas and would say something about those areas. We didn't really know what. But we wanted to be involved in that process. We wanted to have a seat at the table, that is local government at the time. And we didn't really get that, but there was some good work done by WALGA and others, and I'm sure a lot of people in state government recognised that local government needed to be involved in the process, because when Bush Forever was released, there was a lot of areas that people thought should have been included, and there was also, I think, universal recognition that there were a lot of important areas that needed to be addressed regardless of whether they were included as a Bush Forever site or not. And here we are today still talking about, I suppose, the protection of some Bush Forever sites. And we shouldn't forget, I think as Alan pointed out, there's a lot of bushland and natural areas outside of those sites. It'd be fair to say that phase 1 of the planning guidelines have been out, and I think they've been generally well received. There's been a fantastic addendum to those guidelines for the southwest of the state. You can probably find that on the web somewhere too. That's a purple covered document similar to that green one. And it'd be fair to say that Renata's now deeply involved in phases 2 and 3. For those of you who don't know, local biodiversity planning, or which prepares a local biodiversity strategy, is a strategic process. It focuses on what are defined as local natural areas. Now, in the Perth metropolitan region, local natural areas are all those areas of bushland, waterways, rock outcrops, any area that has a high degree or moderate degree of naturalness, and I won't go any further because the definition always gets us caught up, that are outside of the formal Bush Forever sites, that are outside of the Debt Conservation Estate, and are outside of regional parks. Now, I might have muffed that up a little because I've been out of the game for a while, but really it's a lot of all that local bushland that we used to talk about, the local wetlands, our creeks, even drains that were once more like creeks and have been channelized. So it covers a damn lot of stuff. Preparing a strategy is a 4-phase process. Preparing and implementing is a 4-stage process. I won't dwell on this too much. Really, the first stage is getting the local government, the elected members and the executive of the council enthused and willing and understanding about the process they're about to enter, okay? Some of them will see it as a threat. And some of them will see an opportunity, and some of them will have mixed views about it and want to control the process. Because a strategy at the end of the day is something that can be recognised by the WA Planning Commission must be recognised by the council if they're going to invest that money in doing it. And it can be, and it has been recognised by the State Administrative Tribunal. And Renata might be able to talk to you about an example of that, if you wish, in Chittering, where SAT actually used the local biodiversity strategy, which I think was a draft at that stage, to support their decision, which I think led to greater bushland protection. So if you're prepared to go the effort, they are worthwhile. Phase 2 is quite an intensive phase of identifying all those local natural areas, all the natural areas, getting stuck into developing targets, which I won't talk about too much, but other than to say that we try and get some quantifiable targets. Not just the targets we're going to protect all rare species, we're going to do this. It's actually trying to get stuck into the planning system in the local government and define, well, what is possible in terms of protection of local natural areas. And those targets relate to vegetation complexes, which you've probably heard a bit about today. Finalising the strategy is an important process. Local governments are encouraged to put the draft strategy out for public comment before they finalise it. They are also strongly encouraged to integrate their local biodiversity strategy into their planning system as appropriate and as much as possible. When I say planning system, that means integrating components into the local planning scheme if that is appropriate, maybe a new zone, maybe some scheme amendments, or as they're doing scheme amendments, actually incorporating some of the recommendations. It might be new local planning policy. And it might be, what other sort of things? I'll talk about some of the action plans, that's another slide. And 4 is obviously implementation. Implementing one of these strategies is a long-term initiative, okay? It's not seen to be something, it's not supposed to be a shelf sitter, and it's not just a statement of policy. Thank you, Renata, for this lovely slide, which sums up the methodology, which is a bit mad at times. I'm involved in producing a strategy for the Shire of Murray at the moment, and half the job is understanding all the planning constraints and opportunities in the Shire. That's quite aside from understanding the natural environment in the Shire. One of the key messages I want you to take away from this talk is that a local biodiversity strategy is trying to bite into the planning system. And you could be quite cheeky and say the planning system bites back a lot of the time, but it's really trying to actually get down and get quite dirty and not just say we want to protect, but it's saying we want to protect and this is how we're going to protect it. And when you to determine this is how we're going to protect it, you need to understand what are going to be the things that are going to help you protect that bush and which are going to hinder you. So your targets need to be realistic in terms of the targets need to use mechanisms that the planning system will support. So if land, for example, and we'll draw this out in a slide later on, if land has been urban zoned and you're suggesting that and a large portion of that site is a local natural area and it has really important natural features, then you need to understand what sort of mechanisms are supporting the protection of that patch of bush and which are going to undermine that protection. I'm not saying that you can't protect bush on urban zoning, but it's a darn sight harder once it is zoned urban rather than when it is zoned rural. And we can give an example of that where a council is struggling with a rezoning of rural land to urban, and they're wanting to be brave, but they're wondering if the state government will support them if they rezone the land. Well, if you support the rezoning of the land, you shot yourself in the foot. This outlines the main components of a strategy. On your right, you'll see the bushland management tools, which I haven't talked about yet, but strategies do and can lead to quite strategic plans for how the local government intends to look after natural areas on land which it controls. So, for example, I think the city of Gosnells has prepared quite a strategic plan covering all its natural areas. Don't want to single out Wayne, but other local governments have as well, I'm sure. And that's fantastic, and I think local governments are reaping a lot of benefits from that. including being able to demonstrate to their councillors what they're achieving with the money that they're investing in natural area management. On the right-hand side, you've got private landholder incentive strategies, and some local governments have done that, and some local governments have been doing that quite well. I think generally that's an area for improvement. I won't dwell on that one. That could be a whole afternoon session. So back on the right, on the left, sorry. The left, you've got those three elements of the planning system which I talked about, through which a local government implements the strategy. So there's hopefully sort of changes that can be made to the scheme, or there may be, I should say. First of all, I should also say that if a local government has a local planning strategy, which you may have heard of, which is like the strategic umbrella planning document, which influences the scheme in the longer term, if they have one of those, then a local biodiversity strategy should be actually incorporated into that strategy. Doesn't mean physically, but there needs to be a clear recognition by the council that they're dinkum about implementing their local biodiversity strategy. And the local planning strategy over time should actually, I suppose, support what the council's been saying in terms of its targets and the actions it's trying to implement. I mentioned local planning policy. Some local governments have local planning policies, such as the Shire of Serpentine Jarrahdale. They have used that to protect a site. It's not an essential part of implementing a strategy, but it can help when a local government is trying to justify what it's asking for at SAT or at other sort of formal bodies. So it does have a great purpose.
Good afternoon. Now, change of pace. I'll take you through next 10 slides, talking mostly about some examples of how we work with local governments and the results of it, and summarizing some of the key achievements of the project, and talking about one of the latest outcomes of the work of the Perth Biodiversity Project that demonstrates the benefits of local biodiversity strategies. So the first example is the Shire of Mandarin. It's a local government. As you can see, all those colored bits on the map, it's vegetation. The blue areas are state forest areas, but you can't really see on this one the reserved lands, but the colored, the free shades, that's what's classed as local natural area. So it's only about over 9,000 hectares. And someone would ask, why should a shire like Shire of Mandarin, which has more than 68% of remnant vegetation still remaining, worry about biodiversity? One, that their local community is very worried, and they want to maintain the lifestyle that the current environment provides. And the other one was, the key factor was that under the new Planning and Development Act, the local governments are required to prepare local planning strategies. And the strategic planner has realized that, well, before we identify new areas for development, try to avoid some conflicts. So let's actually have a look, where are the key assets that we should avoid from identifying from future development. And that's why they have undertaken the local biodiversity strategy versus the local biodiversity planning process. So this is a result of the prioritization of their local natural areas. They used a set of criteria to identify or assign a relative priority for protection, or relative priority of ecological values for areas. And Ellen, you might be pleased to see that those green bits are linkages. One of the issues is in a shire, very often it's the representation of remnant vegetation that's used as a criteria, but in a Jarrah forest in the Shire of Mandarin, most of the vegetation is relatively well represented in state forest and in regional parks. So we were looking at other criteria that would distinguish certain areas, and certainly maintenance of linkages was one of those. Then in the next stage, one of the other important steps in the planning is that we consider the opportunities and constraints, and that's where the Shire got involved, and they actually reviewed over 200 local structure plans that haven't been progressed to see which one of those they could actually change the design of those structure plans to, if the values within the land were there, to influence the outcome later in planning. So they actually went through quite a tedious process, and at the end they identified these 10 implementation categories. For each patch of local natural areas, they identified whether they can actually conserve it or whether it's already zoned urban, but they will try to retain vegetation through public open space, for example. That's on a lower scale. And this is the outcome. This map, it has been included into a local planning strategy that the Shire developed since then. For each of these implementation categories, they actually have some specific recommendations, changes to the scheme. So at the same time that the Shire prepared a local planning strategy, they also released a scheme amendment, which will through those scheme amendments, they will be able to achieve some of the outcomes. They specified some targets for all of those areas, how many hectares of a certain type of vegetation they are aiming to protect. The scheme amendment and this draft strategy have been out for public comment, endorsed by Council, and they are now waiting for the final endorsement by the Planning Commission. And the comments from the Department of Planning were that the steps and the process the local Shire of Mandarin went through provides a really best practice example in how to integrate biodiversity into land use planning. And they have some other initiatives that I won't mention now. Next one is just quickly the Shire of Chittering. We used slightly different approach here, but this is a very good example where a Shire that is 32% of remnant vegetation remaining, so really try to actually find, can we actually prevent the further clearing below the 30%, and we did find some ways how we could achieve it, and it's at the stage where the Shire of Chittering is now amending their local planning strategy to incorporate this information in there, and we already have land owners coming to us and to the Shire and actually asking how they can design their subdivisions to meet the targets that are set for those individual areas. Those blue areas in there, we call them indicative high conservation value areas, and for each of those we actually set quantitative targets, how many hectares of which vegetation types should be retained to meet the overall target. And again, we identified regional and local linkages for Chittering haven't had before. So here are just some examples and initiatives for not each local government are at different stages of the planning system. The upside down pyramid is just demonstrating some of the work the Environment Planning Project that just documented that to achieve outcomes, it's best to actually incorporate biodiversity conservation early in the land use planning system. So that's why it's important to actually have the important step, not just objectives in your local planning strategies, but actually incorporate some provisions that will justify inclusion of specific zones and reserves that will protect and retain vegetation. So these are the examples of initiatives some of the local governments that have done some of the work. One of the that's worth mentioning is, for example, City of Wanneroo, where it took a long time to develop a local biodiversity strategy, and one of the reasons were that most of the land was already zoned urban, so it was seen as something impossible to achieve. But they actually introduced a new initiative that we actually haven't got an example in Perth, a local conservation reserve. None of the local governments in Perth actually have a local reserve set aside for conservation. It's still waiting for approval from the Department of Planning, but hopefully we will get through. Where and how is that reserve going to be used? There is a special policy that actually explains the criteria that they would use. Alan, to your question with the resource enhancement wetlands, the City of Wanneroo adopted a special local planning policy which actually talks specifically about that they want to preserve and retain resource enhancement wetlands because otherwise it's really difficult. So they have their own policy to do so. And it's a result of a local biodiversity strategy which actually said that that's an important feature that should be kept. So this is just a quick outline of the services or support that's provided through the project to local governments, ranging through the guidelines, training opportunities, templates, planning tools that are available to local governments that were developed through the project. There was one stage where we actually had some funding that we were able to distribute to local governments to encourage uptake of these approaches. And through the targeted grants, unfortunately, we were not able to get the funding for the last couple of years. And one of the important things on the previous slide was that through the process we facilitated a partnership with various agencies, and that was very successful, and we were really lucky of the support we were given by the Department of Environment and Conservation and also Department of Planning. The last 2 years, because of the difficulties with getting funding, it was the Department of Planning that actually got the funding for the project to continue. So this is just a quick map that shows the status of local governments and local biodiversity strategies. Oh, sorry, I'll have to skip through this. They're at various stages. The bright green ones are completed, being implemented. So the key achievements, the methodology has been endorsed by the state through the EPA's guidance statement number 33 refers to the guidelines. WAPC's directions for integration of NRM into land use planning document also refers to the guidelines as a document to use for local biodiversity conservation planning. If these just using 10 local biodiversity strategies, if they were implemented, we potentially could retain or protect over 17,000 hectares on top of what otherwise normally wouldn't have happened. It certainly helped many local governments to demonstrate the need to increase investment in resourcing, in the staffing to deal with biodiversity conservation issues, managing natural areas. We also showed that we can use the system outside. One of the other key points. The two important things are that we demonstrated the effectiveness of the local biodiversity conservation planning process to increase the retention and protection status of vegetation in the region. And there is a range of the tools that were developed through the project, or the data sets are actually used by other state agencies, universities. We often get consultants asking for the data sets. And Andrew mentioned that it's been acknowledged by State Administrative Tribunal as a valid consideration in decision making. Just quick.
Wrap this up very quickly.
Yes, I'll skip this. This was really one of after working with several local governments on local biodiversity strategies, there was always the question asked, well, so is it really making any difference in a region? And through this project, the Regional Framework for Local Biodiversity Conservation Priorities, that there is a link, there is a now public online mapping viewer that you can access. We were able to demonstrate that yes, that's when that we actually, by implementing local biodiversity strategies, we are improving the potential status of vegetation in Perth and Peel. But we also found some interesting, one of the issues were, oh, well, you're only dealing with locally significant areas. We actually proven that many of the local natural areas do meet the regional significance criteria, which is an important point again to make. There are some stats. Some of the important, interesting issues are that we played a little bit with, we made some assumptions how much of the vegetation types would be retained considering the current provisions of the Metropolitan Region Scheme. And if you consider that 25 out of 46 vegetation complexes could be considered threatened in Perth and Peel. And when we look at the distribution of these, for some of them, to retain them, the critical actions need to happen within 1 or 2 local governments. So, back to Andrew.
Andrew David Knowles, Spineless Wonders, Macro-Invertebrate Education and Biosurvey. Just wondering, when the strategic planner colours in all those spaces in the map and abuts that border, do they voluntarily resign?
If I was a politician, I'd say no comment. It's shocking, isn't it? Yeah, it's, look, yeah, I'm here, yeah. Do you want to add to that?
And all the spaces are filled.
Yeah.
What do you do?
Yeah.
All the land uses are filled, and you're at the Shire border. Do you invade and thereby Shire?
It is. My only comment, and I'm not a planner, I'm trained as in science. Planning is a really interesting profession, and I think it's distorted in this state because of a poor legislative base. There needs to be some understanding of how the environment is part of planning. I've only been professionally working for 20 or so years, and it's always been recognised as a problem. And diddly squat's been done about it, frankly. So, you know, there's some real problems in this state, I think. Alan's point about corridors, Renata's already recognised that significantly. It is something that it needs to be recognised in high level, I think, in high level policy or legislation, because it's just too hard for both environmental scientists, for everyone involved to try and actually make it happen. How do you implement it? But because it's hard and we're fighting the battles on individual sites, we just don't get to it. That's my only comment there. The interesting thing about cluster development, it's been hanging around for a long time as one of the solutions in peri-urban, rural, semi-rural areas. Renata put that down, but she actually, I understand, went to a conference over east where Deborah Goostry from UDI, the CEO of UDI, actually made that point. So there's some common ground there. Everyone recognises that that might offer a bit of a solution in some instances. It's not to be used to go into significant areas that otherwise wouldn't be considered from a planning perspective. So it needs to be used sensibly, but there's potentially some common ground there. Oh, and we need a pure bush forever. I mean, it's yeah.